Welcome to Antidote Radio. This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
Okay, so once again, the West has been hit with another act of terrorism. This time, in a lot of ways, you could say it's more high profile than some of the other events, as bad as they've been. And this time, because it took place at a concert of one of the most famous, not just musicians, probably one of the most famous people alive, that being Ariana Grande, the music mega superstar. And of course, now, as we know, the usual suspects are out to let us know that this is once again Islam in the flesh. This is bare naked Islam. I think that's one of Pam Geller's blogs. It's bare naked Islam at work again. And where they tell us how we must, and the British are going once again increasing the methods taken to, quote, protect the population. A lot of people think this was very conveniently done as a means of helping Theresa May's party and keeping Jeremy Corbyn and keeping the momentum of Jeremy Corbyn and his within the Labour Party of Jeremy Corbyn from getting any sort of momentum before for the big election here early next month. And there's some stories coming out about the alleged the bombers' connections to Libya, and some very interesting connections there. We could link a couple articles in the timeline that would have to do with that. Jeremy, what are your first impressions of this? There's a lot of talk going around about this.
I mean, I definitely haven't had the chance to look at the grammar of the alleged attack itself. I still definitely don't know who Ariana Grande is, and I probably am not going to use this as an opportunity to learn.
You don't need to know.
Okay, I can survive in the
The
21st century.
InfoWars crowd has let us know all about how terrible she is, and whether or not there's any validity to it. It's once again just shows the just how virtually brain dead they've become to just get on to just make their target of their wrath a musician, whatever she may represent. So,
I mean, I think Kevin Barrett has a point in assessing and deconstructing these series of European, apparently false flag operations of some sort, especially thinking back on the Bataclan, the Friday the 13th attack, of attacking shows, attacking, music shows, crowds and concert goers and young people, and it doesn't really make sense in terms of if you're a real serious Islamist, jihadist. The cui bono is not quite right. The incentive and the motive is off, and of course the timing. If it's not some type of numerology type of thing, and it's sort of stupid, like when you talk about the apparent numerology of some of these attacks, such as the 3/22, I believe that was the Brussels bombing, or the Friday the 13th, the very obvious one in Paris, but all the way through 9/11, 9/11. And then 911 days later, and you get the 3/11 of 2004 attack in Madrid, and you have the 7/11 attack, I believe, in Mumbai, and you have the 7/7 attack in London, and there's these patterns here, and when you bring it up, people are like, oh, he's a geomancer, he believes in numerology, and be like, dude, if you were a criminologist and a detective, and the detective found these ransom notes, or like they saw that the killer struck on certain days, they wouldn't accuse the detective of of believing or being obsessed with dates and times and numerology just because they're on the path of the killer. No, this goes to the mind of the murderer, and it's so obvious that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with the jihadist, this numerology. Then there's the obvious political context that you talked about, and it is the case. I'm in my mind is this Al Jazeera report that came out pretty recently, coming from a pretty controlled channel in large part. But this was a very good report about the role of pretty much Israeli partisans, probably Israeli intelligence, networks in Britain in working to undermine high-level politicians that they didn't like and to get them out and boot them out and that type of thing. So of course, Jeremy Corbyn, he's actually much realer than Bernie Sanders. There's still a problem with all of these the new neo-progressives, the sort of the new emerging leftists, who are a lot of them old leftists in terms of Corbyn and Sanders, but also Mélenchon. These guys leave a lot to be desired. Some of them in terms of the war on terror, especially. But in general, especially someone like Corbyn, he was friends with Michael Meacher, I believe the environmental minister in England, who was one of the highest level politicians in Europe to directly question the September 11th story. And then also Corbyn is very much in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And even if you don't expose the false flag terror or expose the fraudulent war on terror, even if you just show some solidarity with the Palestinian people, that's enough to...
I'd have to say in that regard, at least, I don't know about him overall, but in that regard, he's a lot better than some of the politicians here in the U.S. who have been held up as as great, great heroes like Sanders and Ellison. So in that regard, he is a lot better and more outspoken than most of our even politicians that would fall on the progressive or consider it as being anti-war. So
yeah, and in many ways, Jeremy Corbyn is the real Bernie Sanders in a certain way, in the same way that maybe Peter Dale Scott is the real Noam Chomsky. And so it is. He's quantitatively more of I believe, an authentic leftist progressive in many ways. And it's clear where this kind of sentiment goes when you have terrorism in a crowd, in a theater, amongst young people. Kevin Barrett points out that it's the younger generations in Europe that increasingly were having more and more sentiment of solidarity with the Palestinian people, and so of course that would be desired to be disrupted by the anti-Islamist authoritarian European forces, and most specifically straight out of Tel Aviv and the global Zionist forces that seek to make the war on terror really a war on Islam, and also a war on freedom in many ways. So it's pretty obvious that the timing on this is very suspicious. I haven't looked into the details about who, what, when, where, why, how, that type of thing. But yeah, I call bullshit on this. Oh, and also one last thing is I also call bullshit on Alex Jones has sort of become, is now chastising CNN for for just barely milk toasting tiptoeing towards the edge of actual balanced journalism. Even though the CNN analyst said that suicide bombing would lean towards an Islamist. And and I think that whole narrative of the suicide bomber is definitely and attaching that to Islamism is very much part of a weaponized narrative that's been intensely constructed. And of course, it's been constructed in some ways in relationship to, I believe, to Takfiri Islam. And Takfiri Islam is in relationship with Wahhabism, and in some ways Wahhabism is seen as a derogatory way of talking about Takfiri Islam. But one of the interesting things is that one of the key maybe theological breaks of the Takfiris is that they believe that something like suicide as a martyr, even if it's meant to kill non-combatants and innocent people, that all of your those sins will be assuaged by Allah. So there's definitely a sense. What I think I called, Kevin Barrett and I were talking about how how you remember that Dennis Ross, after we were kicked out for First Amendment activities out of the Kansas City Public Library, Dennis Ross identified that his friend had called Israel the first Jewish Sunni state. And Kevin Barrett took offense at that because that there's many authentic forms of Sunni Islam that have now been painted with the broad brush of the Takfiri terrorist in many ways. But in some ways, you could say that there is obviously this deepening relationship that in many ways actually probably is religious and ethnically, historically based between what you might call the Takfiri Jewish state and the Wahhabist state in Saudi Arabia, and that's just becoming more and more evident that is not a place of enmity or tension so much, but increasingly some type of partnership or a proxy situation, maybe Israel to Saudi Arabia. So just thinking through this idea of the suicide bomber, that needs to be deconstructed. And if you dig deep into the stories of what actually has happened in Iraq, and the not only the intentional destruction of the cultural wealth and assets of Iraq, the way that the provisional authority, U.S. Military was stood down, it looks like, in order to allow the looting of key cultural institutions in Iraq, but also the assassinations of academics and key cultural leaders that I've call political genocide or national cultural genocide of some sort, and that was a actual program. But then when you actually look at the stories of a lot of these alleged suicide bombings, it comes out that it's some guy who was given a package. He's probably tasked by some shadow black operator who's says they're working for the coalition forces, and they're like, take this, you do a job and take this package over here, and then it's activated by cellular phone or some type of communication device, and then it just blows up, and it's called a suicide bomb, but really it's a false flag suicide bombing. And also I think about the Hamas and the Israeli intelligence role in the early formation and backing of the early leaders of Hamas, specifically I believe Sheikh Yassin in the 80s. And supposedly there was a split in Israeli intelligence about some wanted to not do that, but the majority won out, and they did back the early formation of Hamas. And I don't want to undermine the Palestinian right to resist physically in terms of occupation, ongoing occupation, but there is a sense that the culture of suicide is in many ways one of the biggest boons of the Israeli overlords in terms of their relationship with the Palestinian people, and because the Israeli expansionist warfare state knows that they're going to lose. If there were a level playing field, an level intellectual playing field globally, they were going to lose the battle for the hearts and minds. And even with a very uneven playing field, they've been starting to lose the battle of hearts and minds. And then a lot of times you see something go boom, as Gore Vidal said when talking about the Israeli conundrum. Things, when you start talking about it, seem to go boom, whether it's in Norway and their support for Palestinians, and then they experience terror attacks, or France, even as they were growing in solidarity and support for Palestinian statehood, or the potential victory of a Jeremy Corbyn in England. Things have a tendency to go boom, and then it's blamed on suicidal Muslim, thus intensifying, activating the deep hindbrain satanic power of terrorism in a new generation of people.
Yeah, I'm just glad you brought up the clip of Alex on of critiquing the CNN report. And although the CNN report was BS itself, as it seemed like the whoever the person was that was cited by Alex and by Infowars was insinuating that it was right wingers that may have been responsible for what happened. But I mean, this is the kind of thing that is to be expected when you've got Jerome Corsi as your new White House correspondent. So I believe you've coined a phrase to kind of describe what the Alex Jones types are doing now with the truth movement. Would you care to share that?
Matisma, or make the truth movement Zionist again, I think. Something like that. I don't know if it fits on a red hat, but you could put it on a black t-shirt. It could be the next generation of the truth movement 2.0. We're Zionists now. Deal with it.
Well, that
from John Gold to Alex Jones, we're all on board.
Yes, and now you said you had some thoughts about the infamous orb in Saudi Arabia. As far as that whole thing with Trump and the Saudi king and all these others touching this orb during the trip to Riyadh.
Yes, well, literally, it is a palantir, which refers to these orbs of knowledge and power that I think the wizards in the Lord of Rings series use. But of course, Palantir is also the company co-founded by Peter Thiel, who was one of Trump's most prominent, or maybe only prominent, Silicon Valley supporter. And Peter Thiel, of course, is of Bilderberg fame. He was at some point he was a Ron Paul supporter allegedly, but then he's also at the Bilderberg meeting, and he started this company called Palantir. This is after he co-founded PayPal with a whole bunch of guys who went on to start other companies, which would include people like Elon Musk, who went on to start Tesla and SpaceX and that type of thing.
Sounds like Palantir's to this community what Vice is to like limited hangout, half truth, alternative media creators of that kind of content.
You mean Peter in Thiel terms of a nexus?
Yes.
Well, yeah. They call it the PayPal Mafia. Is a term in Silicon Valley, because there's the guys from YouTube who started YouTube started there. A whole bunch of people, and that included Peter Thiel, and of course PayPal was eventually bought up by eBay of Omidyar fame.
Yes,
right?
Yes, The Intercept.
The Intercept. Omidyar intercepted the Snowden leaks, I guess, somehow. It seems like by paying progressives a lot of money is how that was done. But then Thiel is an interesting character here, and Palantir, which is basically the next generation of counterterrorism, total surveillance software that's been put into a lot of the police communities around the United States, with deep contracts and connections in the U.S. intelligence community. Yes, and so now I believe that was a Palantir system that they were featuring in Saudi Arabia, and it's such a strange scene. Like it was like 24 for Arabs, or it was like Jack Bauer, and it's going to be like Bauer Muhammad. Is he Jewish or is he Wahhabi? Yes, he's both. and he's tracking down all of the evil 9/11 truth people that think Zionists did 9/11. Or, it was not. It was a very strange scene there, and then it's Donald Trump, and they're sort of touching the glowing orb. So there's definitely this sort of Luciferian symbolic overtones to all of that played into that too, in terms of his trip and going in a symbolic way to the three major locations of the three major religions of the book in the West, in terms of he starts in Saudi Arabia, the home of Mecca and Medina, and then he goes to Israel, the home of Jerusalem, and then he goes to the Vatican and meets with the Pope, who looked at him also in a side-eyed way. And of course, along the way, there's all kinds of gossipy little weird things going on with Melania, and Melania is smacking his hand away, and you don't know, is that because Trump didn't tell her about the whole Epstein, the roaring 90s of his Epstein days, and when you become president and Netanyahu begins to ratchet up the leverage, and with through Eisenberg or whoever it may be, that then everything becomes clear to your wife, who didn't know what kind of guy you actually were. Or is it some other thing? Who knows? But this whole trip is filled with intrigue, and yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to think of it. Hundreds of billions of dollars of weapons deals with Saudi Arabia. It looks like the Israelis are not uncomfortable with technology transfer to Saudi Arabia like they were in the 80s.
You pointed out that this is not 1981 anymore, and this is not AWAC sales to Saudi Arabia, which is actually what defeated Rockefeller, which is actually what caused AIPAC to step in on behalf of the opponent of Rockefeller family member Senator Charles Percy in '84. This is not that era anymore. The political landscape has changed a lot in that part of the world since then.
Yes, and we've pointed to this 80s episode of the AWACS to Saudi Arabia that AIPAC tried to block, but I believe failed, right? In blocking it, as the...
I believe they ultimately failed, but they did get a couple of senators, prominent congressmen and senators who supported it out of office, though.
Yes, and so they exerted their power anyways. But in so many ways, this episode was one of the exceptions that proved the rule. In certain ways, it's the exceptions that people like Chomsky would focus on in trying to debunk the Israel lobby hypothesis that he thought was as silly as in the 2000s of the 9/11 truth movement, and of actually doing logical, a logical look at the grammar before you do a priori negations of possible scenarios. You can go look at the YouTube videos of Chomsky defeats the 9/11 truth conspiracy nutballs with pure logic. So I guess that means you don't even have to... You don't even have to have facts. You can only have Noam Chomsky's logic and his...
Anybody could spend an hour online and become a physics expert.
And Noam Chomsky apparently can spend a decade and a half and not see two and a half seconds of Building 7 coming straight down. Yeah,
but he knows climate change is the biggest threat we've ever faced.
Well, but there's a consensus, and so I guess Noam Chomsky has no sense, especially since he's gotten paid for half a century by a military-industrial complex hub, that there's such a thing as the problem of epistemological warfare, or hierarchies of epistemology, and that knowledge has something to do with power. But Noam Chomsky doesn't think that, and so that's the reason that there's only thousands of architects and engineers for 9/11 truth, rather than tens of thousands of scientists that that back the anthropogenic climate change hypothesis. But yeah, Noam Chomsky's down to fully go for the scientific consensus, as long as that scientific consensus does not rock the boat of the powers that be too much, and then more importantly, that he doesn't have to think for himself in a grammatical, fact-based fashion, and he can just disparage people. Here's what you can do: you can spend zero time on the internet, Noam Chomsky, and look at a picture of an orange and still know it's an orange and not the apple that the military-industrial Zionist media tells you it is, and still not be a biologist after 2 hours on the internet.
Yeah, this trip, and you mentioned some things with Melania Trump, and there's some things in her background that suggest that perhaps that she, even with regards to the person who, some of the connections of the person who initially introduced Donald Trump to Melania, that in some ways maybe she wouldn't be just shocked by some of the things that Trump said to be involved in. But that's another topic for another day. But when you start
who
seeing,
introduced Melania to Trump, I didn't know.
oh, I forget the guy's name, but I forget the name. The name escapes me at the moment. The man who introduced them, I forget the name. So
Not the limited guy, was it?
um,
Sorry. Okay.
I can't remember. I have to look it up later. But Paolo Zampoli.
Oh, look at those archives in your brain, Greg. Dang.
Well, I pulled it up. I did a Google search. I cheated. Paolo Zampoli. He was a modeling agent.
Well, Noam
And I
Chomsky
think
still
you
has
had
a
some,
Google Building 7, so whatever.
Yeah. I'm not going to get into it right now. I'm not positive, but he may have himself some. I believe I have to go back and check it out. We talked about it on a future show. Had some connections to the whole Epstein, all that Epstein stuff himself. So he's the man who introduced Donald Trump to Melania. So we can maybe get into that another time. But if and when you start seeing more and more criticism of Trump with regards to some things he may or may not have done, or people he may or may not have protected in the past, that's when you might know that. And with that, and if the Republicans, the Adelson-funded, owned Republicans at Congress really start to come out against Trump, that's when you probably know that he's lost the support of the right-wing base, the right-wing Zionist base that got him elected. So, I think you'll know by those things. But this trip to Saudi Arabia, and you go back to I didn't mean to get off track there, by the way, but you go back to this Manchester attack, and it came within, 2 days after Trump introduced this alliance to combat extremism in Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's just the absolute, that's just backwards in and of itself.
The Arab NATO, right?
It is an Arab
sense.
NATO. It's going to be a coalition, I believe, of pretty much it's Saudi Arabia and the friendly, what they call moderate Islam states that are that will be used to counter quote extremism, and also to form an alliance against Iran. So
watch out for false flags, because it's apparently most of the false flags of the last 50 years in Europe especially have probably been run through NATO networks. So watch out for the Arab NATO.
Absolutely. And I mean, when you think about it, though, what is NATO there to do? With NATO, it seems like now, at least the way that the European establishment, also the DC elite, that it seems like the group that Trump is not completely in bed with, within the DC political class as well as the European political elites, they want NATO to be a bulwark against Russia, right? It seems that NATO is going to be like the catalyst or the outfit to continue to carry out this increasing of tensions with Russia. And an Arab NATO would do the same thing in regards to what is seen as the preeminent threat in this part of the world, which is Iran. So I mean, I think it serves a lot of the same goals, and everybody. It's funny how everyone from even most of Trump's biggest foreign policy critics were very on the right, at least on the quote right side of the spectrum, were very praiseworthy of his Middle Eastern trip. Dan Center, who was said to be the guy who was behind the Romney speechwriter, who was said to be behind the release of the Billy Bush audio, he was praising Trump's Middle East trip. Newt Gingrich is saying this is flashbacks to Reagan, and how the Washington Post op-ed he wrote, the president just made a titanic foreign policy shift and the media missed it, and now he's going after a realistic policy away from the Obama days. These neocons, are even the ones who don't like Trump for domestic reasons, or for maybe he's not hard enough on Russia, they're jubilant in a lot of ways over this foreign policy, over this trip he's made, minus the fact that now Trump has let some of his less some of the qualities that make the unconventional qualities that he has, like his impulsiveness, say some things, or not automatic, or not completely commit to various NATO related projects here in the West. But I mean, overall, in terms of the trips to Saudi Arabia and Israel, I'd say that the right side of the foreign policy establishment very positive towards this trip. And I've got this problem here. You continue to have this course, and it's very confusing because we've talked about the right elements, the people in the right that are that have been defended Trump regardless of everything that's gone on, and continue to insist that either he's playing this complicated chess game, or else if he just listens to the right people and gets the wrong people out of his ear, he'll do the right things. And there's still a lot of people there are some people who are trying to justify this whole idea of this trip to Saudi Arabia, or even the trip to Israel, and still trying to make things that I just don't see as being true out of it. And the idea that Trump can go over to Saudi Arabia and Israel, both countries, threaten Iran the entire time, give hundreds some $billion worth of weapons to the Saudis, we're going to get into an interesting topic here in a couple minutes that I think will shed some light on Donald Trump and his I don't know if we're going to call it a personality profile or what we're going to do, but give some ideas based on what we've seen of what Donald Trump is and what he is not, in our estimation, based on what we've seen and what we've evaluated. But I think it's just at this point, if you continue to just try to see things as you want them to be, rather than at the very least acknowledging the dangers of this deal, and because you can have a view of, well, maybe he's just doing this to, some people are saying, oh, he's just getting he's letting them put the noose around their necks or whatever. But I think there's a blind, optimism gets very dangerous after a while. And I mean, I think that you have to look at this, even if you have this belief deep down that maybe Trump is like somehow playing these people. I mean, you got to look at reality for what it is, and this is a extremely very, very dangerous precedent, and I think it's going to cause a lot of misery for a lot of people as a result of what is going to be done with the money and the weapons that have been given to this regime in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, especially thinking of the hypocrisy of the rise of JASTA and the rise of the 28 pages during the Trump campaign, and how he played into that, and how InfoWars was like, Trump's gonna release the 28 pages, and then the 28 pages were released, and it was it was sort of what we were saying. It was like sort of ho hum, like it was counterintelligence documents that showed some of the Patsy legends, and there were little tie-ins that you could follow into some of the more narrative aspects of September 11th, the ideation, as Christopher Bullen might call it, in terms of these Israeli networks and how they were handling potentially these Patsy networks. But then Trump goes, and his big breakthrough is that 9/11 happened under Bush. We shouldn't have gone into Iraq, but now that we did, we should have taken the oil. You're going to find out there's some very secret pages, and if you look at them, then you're going to find out who really knocked down the towers, and I'll give you a hint. It's Saudi Arabia. So, and then here you go, and it's give the orb and touching the orb with the Saudis, and giving the Saudis hundreds of billions of dollars. They're probably going to amplify the assault on Yemen, and so there's a lot of dirtball in all of this, and you can imagine the amount of leverage and pressure that's coming down on Trump from all of these sides, plus the fact that he's a made-ass man from way back. And at the same time, there are those that want to make
which
the
no
truth
one
movement
wants.
Zionist again, but there's also a rising, authentic, mature truth movement that factors in all analyses, no matter whether they're politically incorrect or uncomfortable, to all aspects of power, all aspects of the left-right political spectrum. So that's in the mix, and I believe that those kind of analyses are also happening at higher levels in more internal situations, and especially in areas like military and intelligence.
Yeah, and which yes, and what you said there, that people don't want to get into these areas. You know, a lot of people don't want to get into these areas that are like politically incorrect. And honestly, I think, and that includes the fact that you said Trump is a made-ass man going way back, and really no one wants to talk about that, whether it's in the mainstream or in the quote alternative. There's maybe a handful of people willing to talk about that very topic, and there's also a handful of people who are willing to talk about the actually look at Trump's connections beyond just this knee-jerk reaction of whether or not, yes, Russia got involved in the election or no, it didn't. And either way, with that narrative, you really get a whole lot of just noise. But when you start looking at the mob elements and the Russian mafia, which is connected closely to seems to be closely connected to the Shabbat Lubavitch movement, which Vladimir Putin also has connections through some of the most powerful Jewish leaders in Russia that he is acquainted himself with. That leads you to a very much what we said is another very politically incorrect conclusion, and it will make a lot of people very uncomfortable to really look into it. But I feel that you and I and others out there, and it's not to toot our own horn as if we're better than other people, but I mean, we can hopefully maybe lead some other people to be able to start talking about some of this stuff more by having this conversation within the alternative community, because it's vitally important to go to the facts wherever they take you. And even if we're not always on the ball about everything, we may be wrong about some things, we may get some things wrong in our analysis, but I know this for a fact, I know you do too, it feels good to be able to just lay down at night knowing that you've at the very least are telling the truth as you see it. And that is something that you're planning on doing next week at the Left Forum in New York. Do you want to take maybe a minute or two to talk about what's going to be going on out there?
Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting scenario over at the Left Forum this year. I believe the theme is the resistance. And there was definitely some resistance to the deep state panels that were proposed by some courageous folks. And only 2 out of 5 of the panels were accepted by the Left Forum. There was definitely agitation against our group of people. Some of it came from some shady backgrounds, people such as Kai Kieferle, who's a known troll of the Anthony Hall Canadian realm, and then Spencer Sunshine coming out of the bowels of the Political Research Associates, and the John Foster Burleigh, the anti-racist guy who believes everything that the white Zionist supremacist media told him about the evil Muslims did 9/11. And so these people are coming out the woodworks and trying to get people like Kevin Barrett and Tony Hall not allowed. At the same time, there's obviously some real leftists at the Left Forum, and some real activists, and some real people who are not all about suppressing speech. And so this was a close call, and a few panels made it through. A panel that I'm going to be doing with Tony Hall and maybe some other potential people is going to be about thought police and the usage of things like political correctness to stop conversation. And Tony's going to be talking about his experience at the University of Lethbridge in relationship to his work in False Flag Weekly News with Kevin Barrett, but also his general work, a larger work that he's progressed as he's learned more and more about the War on Terror, from his days as an indigenous studies scholar into a globalization studies scholar, into taking this step into understanding that the war on terror was a fraud, and it was part and parcel of an ongoing war against indigenous people, this time with a heavily Jewish Zionist frame. And so that's indicative of people who make progress towards more and more comprehensive and more honest frameworks of analyses. And so Tony's going to be coming at it from that perspective and talking about being suspended without pay at first, basically on the whims of the B'nai B'rith, which of course the B'nai B'rith comes out of a Jewish Masonic organization from the 1800s. The ADL in some way is a subset of the B'nai B'rith, and it's part and parcel of the global deep Jewish state, I would say. And they organized in a dishonest fashion, really, because they used these Joshua Goldberg images that were posted by someone on Tony's page at the opportune moment at the end of the summer while he was here in Kansas, and while he was about to go back to the classroom. And then just so happened that this Joshua Goldberg PSYOP Facebook image, digital false flag terrorism, really, was used to get him out of the classroom and to incite the Jewish community against him in many ways. So he's going to be talking about that, and I'm going to be talking about our experience, Greg, at the Kansas City Public Library, and what I've learned in the process and what I've learned since about the nexus of the U.S. and Israeli security states, and how not only was speech, press, and assembly rights assaulted that evening, but also the religious freedom and religious conscience was apparently under assault that night by people who were trained in Israel by the so-called security service of the Jewish state, that then put an actual Jewish person trying to speak about ethics in terms of being Jews and Americans under both physical and legal assault that's still ongoing to this day. But we must always work the truth judo. When your nemesis makes a move at you, sometimes they can not only stumble, you could actually use their force. Maybe sometimes they were a little too aggressive with you, or they were a little bit too reactionary. And if you breathe and you respond rather than react, then you can truth judo and spin negative situations into positive dynamics. So I'm going to be touching on different aspects of that, and include what I've learned more and more about the overarching Israelification of our technological sector, of our social media sector, of our security sector, and how it might have played a role that evening in the Palestinification of basically the entirety of the First Amendment in an American library.
Yeah, we're rooting for you, and we're hoping for the best, and hopefully we'll be able to maybe even get you on, do a show together while you're in New York, or while you're gone next week. So we're very interested in seeing that. And we're hoping that clips will come out from these events. I know last year the panel Barrett was put out. It's always on YouTube, so we're hoping that happens again this year. But
and definitely some truth judo, I believe, will come out of this reactionary move from some in the left forum community in terms of rejecting three panels. You can't kill ideas. You can't kick out ideas from a global digital community. They still will find a way to make their voices heard, maybe even heard more loudly, because you've now created controversy around it. And so I applaud the brave and disciplined and intrepid folks who have helped make this happen. And two women specifically, Kat McGuire and Cheryl Curtis, who have brought together a very interesting group of panelists and worked some very stormy, turbulent waters, and are navigating the ship of truth very evenly.
Well, we commend you too, Jeremy, for the. This is vitally important, and so we're looking forward to it. Now, I wanted to get into. I alluded to it earlier. This is something a little different here, but I think that you and I we've talked a lot about Donald Trump and where we might feel that the actual possible quote unquote threat that he may actually pose to the ruling power order, elite structure, whatever you want to call it, power structure, power elites, whatever you want to call it, and where it's elements within his personality and just the kind of his at least public persona, at least the image he puts on of being a strong alpha male who's always in charge and in control of everything, who's very thin skinned and has very impulsive reactions to things, and so I think it's interesting to talk about what Donald Trump represents and what he does not represent. And there's a lot of, I would say, I think you agree with this, there's a lot of confusion, I think, with people. And there's a couple of reasons for this confusion. Number one is because, as we've talked about, Donald Trump is not a conventional politician. He is, unlike any politician we've had, at least in modern American history, as far as especially somebody who's made it as high as the presidency. He's unlike any president that's ever served, at least in modern history. And he's unlike most modern Western leaders in general. Donald Trump, in that he's not a politician. He doesn't come from a political background. He doesn't have the same formal, training as far as polishness that your typical politician has. So he shoots off the cuff a lot of times. Like, a perfect example of this is when he's in Israel, after meeting with reporters and taking questions with Netanyahu, he makes a statement. By the way, I did not mention Israel in reference to the alleged leak that came out that was said to tell intel leak about ISIS carrying bombs onto I believe laptops that was leaked to Russia that is said to have come from Israel. So I mean, that's just an example of his impulsive personality. But there's that with his unconventional, combined with the fact that you've got the alternative media, the entire alternative right spectrum, all the way from people who are now ridiculously considered alternative media like Sean Hannity and Ann Coulter, all the way to people who have truly been like what you might say on the fringes of media and society over the years, like Alex Jones and so many others, have all kept saying Donald Trump is anti-establishment. He's against the grain. He's not one of them. He's not like everybody else. He's out of the establishment, and he's therefore not going to play ball or whatever, which to an extent is true. But the image of Trump as being like this warrior, crusader against the establishment and against everything that's wrong in the world, that combined with his personality, I think that there's been a lot of confusion over what he represents. And another area is this idea that a lot of people have this belief that he is somehow, because of the reaction, and we've gone into this in depth about the reaction of a lot of the more prominent neoconservatives in the Jewish neoconservative establishment in here in America, as well as the Jewish liberal establishment, wringing their hands about Trump and what a danger and what a threat he poses. This has given people the idea that Trump is very much that he's very much opposed not just to the globalist side of the spectrum, but also to that he is going to be the guy who's going to rein in the Zionist entity and really put a kibosh on what they call the Greater Israel plan, and that he's not Bibi's boy. He's not playing ball with the Zionists, or that he'll smile to their face and work against them behind their backs. And there is some legitimacy to this, because Donald Trump's mentor was Roy Cohn, who was of course, Jewish himself, was the lawyer to Joe McCarthy, was named by Michael Collins Piper as a conspirator in the JFK assassination, with a group connected to a group called Permindex. But he was Donald Trump's mentor, and it's very likely that the mentality of people like Roy Cohn, they very much are opposed to Jewish liberalism. They see it as weak, and they see it as bad for the Jewish people. They see it as bad for what's best for Israel and Zionism. And this mentality continued to be carried out with people like Steve Bannon, who was a huge controversy over not wanting his children to go to school with little Jewish brats. I think was the what he said, and things of that nature. But Trump's personality, though, makes you believe that maybe he is this stuff, maybe he is this and this. But the fact remains, it goes back to I think that when you really look at his connections and who he's been connected to his entire life, and the fact that it is in fact a conservative Jewish Zionist by the name of Ronald Lauder, who is the one that is the main person that is pushing back against the Netanyahu, Adelson, Breitbart consensus that Trump should push to move the embassy to Jerusalem and fight against the although Lauder may actually believe in moving the embassy, I don't know, but Lauder's the one who's fighting against the hardcore, hard-right Zionist settlement building, unlimited settlements, and against working with the corrupt Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas for, quote, peace in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinians. But I think with Trump, it's just more or less with Trump, I think that yes, there are a lot of people who hate him, who despise him within the, I believe, especially within the D.C. class and the Western political class, which Donald Trump is not connected to, really, does not come from that class. But I think that the biggest fear of Trump is not that he's going to really do any major like work to just completely deconstruct everything that's happened, that has been the post World War II global consensus, is as they love to call it within like the Council on Foreign Relations circles. But the real fear is that Donald Trump is a very thin-skinned, egotistical individual who is prone to impulsiveness. If he feels that somebody is hostile to him, he may try to work against them, or he could be seen as the kind of guy who, if he feels slighted in any way, he could potentially become like a loose cannon wild card and work against you. But that's where I think you see people like Benjamin Netanyahu who are working really hard to stroke Donald Trump's ego and to not offend him as much as they possibly can. So in a nutshell, I think that the fear of Donald Trump, especially from within the Zionist right, which got Trump elected, if there is any legitimate worries about Trump, it's the influence of people like Ronald Lauder, as well as the impulsiveness of Trump, where he could be the kind of guy that could be very vicious and turn against you if he feels slighted by you anywhere, if he feels that you're working against him.
Yes, the idea of the gangster culture and the made man mentality is, I believe, key to understanding Donald Trump's psychology. Because he came up in this New York sort of institutionalized, officialized gangster culture.
An environment that no other president has come.
Yes, he didn't. He was not. He was not in Georgetown, hanging out with the Washington elite. He was in Manhattan.
Except for perhaps Reagan to a lesser extent with the Hollywood connections, but no one else really in modern era.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you can even think about like Richard Nixon in a way. And then you can see some of the resonance with the Nixon kind of character with Donald Trump. But Nixon was much more integrated in, although it was West Coast, it was, a different type of background. But and Reagan, of course. But they were politicians. And you're right, Trump is not a politician. He is basically a reality TV populist of some sort. And so I can see those that say that if there is a moment now where there is not only the rising of the global Zionist mob and the sort of greater Israel crew who are still have hopes to start some type of regional war or even a world war potentially, and under that cover or under cover of a larger 9/11 2B and a larger scale can drive the Palestinians out into Egypt or Jordan or both, and begin in a certain way to solidify the greater Israel project. And you could see in certain ways where it's already being formed in many ways, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a singular country. It could just be an idea of influence. And so the Trump's role in solidifying and backing the new Arab NATO, you could see that as part and parcel of the extension of the Israeli influence in the region, especially in the way that it's the Arab world and its gathering and connection with Israel is being weaponized against Iran. So, and clearly Trump was brought up as a character, as a political character, let's say, as he entered in the race. He explains his initial impetus in terms of how bad the Iran deal was. And I don't know why. It must have been, that must have been at some type of handled position, whether it's from his relationships with Ronald Lauder, who was a clear, person of interest in terms of the key role of the real estate transfer in making sure that the September 11th operation could go forth in the most massive part of the sort of shock and awe made for TV part of it, in the massive destruction of buildings on live television. And Lauder was a key player in all of that. And also we need to think about Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a snake. Netanyahu is not Netanyahu. He changes his alleged stance on things, like he changes his hair color. He probably has as many stances on moving the embassy to Jerusalem as names he had when he grew up as an intelligence operative in the United States. Benjamin Netan. He even had Irish names, I think. And of course, he knew Mitt Romney. He knew Condoleezza Rice. This was a guy. This is a gangster who will tell you whatever he needs to tell you. So you don't know what Netanyahu actually thinks. I don't really think Netanyahu is actually deeply religious. I don't think he even really cares that much about Jerusalem, except for that it's a key piece of power propaganda, and he's being threatened by his right. And so I think you're right. He's going to manage his sort of delicate asset, Trump, while applying pressure. There's probably blackmail pressure there of a serious sort, but there's probably a lot of other people read into the blackmail pressure. And so Trump is being handled in a very sort of dexterous but iffy way, probably by many different parties. And Netanyahu is up there. You should go look at just sort of the personal vibe of when Trump is in Israel with Netanyahu, and you can see Trump cross his arms at key moments in certain people's speeches, including Netanyahu. And so I think that says something. Trump is like he'll throw a fit. He'll close down on you if you try to get something over on him and he feels disrespected. So yeah.
And they definitely, I mean, that's the thing. The Israeli right sees him still sees him as their guy, and they did not expect I think that's where it comes from. It's the fear that Trump is volatile, impulsive, and is prone to just, if he feels slighted in any way, he'll turn against you, even if he is compromised. But I think that's where the real root of, like, the Donald Trump, where the threat, any sort of threat Donald Trump poses, especially to the base that got him elected. And I think that that's what it is. It's just that it comes down to, the mob mentality that he's had probably from being around these people his entire life and being a made man. So on that note, do you want to add anything else?
Well, I guess we live in interesting times, but let's try to live in peaceful times too.
All right.
All right.
Thanks,
Antidote
Jeremy.
out.
Have a good one.
You too.